Hi and welcome to the Homeopathy Health Show. I am Atiq Bhatti, a fourth generation homeopath with over 20 years of professional experience in this field of healing. In the Homeopathy Health Show, I'll be talking all things homeopathy and natural, with guest interviews, tips and advice, and answering some of your questions. Homeopathy is truly a unique complementary system of healing suitable for all ages, young and old. I'd love to hear from you and welcome your questions on homeopathy and how it can or has helped you. Feel free to email me at health@liketreatslike.co.uk or visit www.liketreatslike.co.uk for more information. Whilst you're there, take a look at the Knowledge Academy and blog section where you will find interesting information. Both sections are growing day by day, so always check back. So let's begin today's show on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio, real feel-good radio. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Homeopathy Health Show here on UK Health Radio. As always, I hope you are well and I hope you've had a pleasant week. Now, this episode I wanted to talk mental and emotional health and well-being. Homeopathy is an amazing science that has shown incredible success in treating a myriad of mental and emotional health conditions, and in fact I find a large proportion of my time in clinic is focused on patients asking for help in overcoming such conditions. I've always found that by careful selection of key homeopathic remedies, such conditions can be tackled with great effectiveness, leading to the desired outcome and results. Now, before talking about homeopathy and the key remedies, of course, for one's health, I thought it would be prudent to have a mental health expert come on the podcast to share their medical knowledge and expertise on this subject. So earlier this week, I talked to Dr. Shakeel Ahmad, a consultant psychiatrist, on a number of mental health conditions. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Shakeel Ahmad, consultant psychiatrist. Dr. Shakeel has over 20 years of experience working as a consultant. He has experience in treating a variety of adult-related psychiatric disorders, while also working in various clinical settings, including acute inpatients, psychiatric intensive care, community and outpatients, outreach, neuropsychiatry, low secure and rehabilitation settings. Dr. Shakeel has also been one of the contributors to the World Health Organization's Guide on Mental Health to Primary Care. Dr. Shakeel, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the Homeopathy for Health show today. Thank you for taking time to speak to me.
Thank you for inviting me to your Homeopathy Health podcast. I'm very pleased to be here. And I appreciate your efforts to raise awareness regarding mental health issues that we experience, and also discuss some of the help that may be available for people.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say. The pleasure is all mine, certainly. I find recently, post-COVID, that more and more people are opening up about their mental health issues. And they're finding a variety or a host, it's so large, the field itself, that, or the symptoms, I should say, rather than the field, the symptoms that they're experiencing. So what is your take on this? What are the causative factors here as far as good mental health is concerned against what has happened post-COVID?
COVID has been one of the major stressors that the world has experienced in the recent past. Look at the figures, 750 million confirmed cases worldwide. Out of them, around 7 million died. When such a thing is happening, what do you think is going to go through the mind of those 750 million confirmed cases or people who come in close contact with them? They're likely to be anxious. It's human to respond with anxiety to such a major stressor. And that's one of the key messages that I would like to convey, that not every anxious response or stress response is an illness in itself. It's how our nature, our mental nature or psychological mindset is programmed to help us then prepare for how to respond better to such circumstances. We react in different ways. Some people are likely to become more apprehensive. Others become more sad or depressed. Others may become more restless or agitated. And similarly, some would not be able to sleep as well. And that varies from an individual to individual. Similarly, you can have different degree of reactions. And that's very interesting, why some people would react with more anxiety and others would not become so anxious. What is in fact happening is that there is, on one hand, the support network that we have around us, and then our internal or psychological coping strategy. These two sit on one side and prevent us from having a mental health condition or a response, while on the other side, there is the external stressors like COVID and the inner, you can say, proneness to respond in a psychological way to some stressor, which is more likely to push us towards a mental health condition. So it's a matter of balance between these two. If somebody's got more strength on the supportive and coping skills ability, they are less likely to tip over to a mental health condition. And I would just add that a simple way to decide whether it's just a natural reaction or it is become an illness is about trying to assess whether the person's being able to do their day-to-day functions as they usually would. So if in my case, I have some family duties, I have some professional duties or local community duties. So if I'm able to, despite being anxious in response to there being COVID around me or now in the post-COVID period, I'm still managing those situations. That means even though I have some anxiety in me, which is a natural reaction, which is making me think how I can reduce the risk of me getting those infections or any other risk to my family, but I'm functioning. So it's not gone into a disorder yet. On the other hand, if I start becoming unable to function in any of my areas of my responsibility, then one should consider that, look, this is becoming an illness, and let's try to do something to prevent it and it become more worse.
That's very, very good and important and realistic advice, actually, because I think that sometimes it can become quite blurred for somebody who perhaps has gone through an episode or several, let's say several episodes of stress or anxiety, to actually differentiate between whether they have something long-term perhaps, or even an acute episode, or whether it's just a natural response. And I think that's very, very important as a gauge that if you can, like you've quite rightly said, function, then it's not as serious as perhaps you think, but it's just is there such a thing that, the mind is just overthinking itself into a condition as such?
The mind can overthink, yes. The more, it can be a vicious circle. You get a little bit anxious, you begin to think about it a lot. And if you indulge in a lot of thinking, that makes you more anxious, and that makes you think more about it. But yet again, if you're doing this on one side, but performing your duties regularly, you're still coping well. On the other hand, it may then ultimately spiral into a bigger and bigger, more and more symptoms of anxiety, and then you could develop an illness. But I would share with your listeners that Lancet, the famous scientific journal, a year ago, published a study about mental health in relation to COVID experience in the world. And they did pick up on increase of episodes of anxiety or depression or obsessive disorders in people who had previous history of these. So these patients had more of a relapse. And similarly, WHO published about 12 or 13% increase in the decade that covered the COVID period. in increase of mental illness as well as increase of substance misuse. So there is those established statistics available for us to consider when we are thinking of COVID period and the period around it and mental illness.
So on one side, Dr. Shakeel, is it it's okay then, isn't it, to feel within reason, of course, to feel some sort of anxiety because of the fact that, very sad, of course, the statistics that you mentioned right at the beginning of the sheer number of fatalities or deaths related to COVID, and also the fear because many countries around the world, including in the UK, where, of course, this show is being recorded, we went into lockdown. And for our generation, and even the previous generation, this was something very new. They'd never seen something like this. So it's almost normal to have that response, because if you don't, then is on the other side, if you don't have such a response, then maybe that's not normal.
You're absolutely right. I mean, think of someone walking on the street and it's very windy, and then they notice a tree branch is just about to break and fall, and they're practically under the tree. They're going to get very anxious. And it's that initial surge of anxiety that's going to immediately make a reflex reaction, and they're likely to runningly come out of the range of that branch. So my point is that these anxieties and these psychological reactions have a very protective and naturally beneficial role in our lives. So with COVID-related anxiety, when we were going through it, our anxieties meant that we developed routines in our household, didn't we? Come from outside, wash your hands properly or thoroughly. And if you've touched a lot more, then you keep using those hand gels and sanitizers, even when you were outside. Wash your food properly, keep your house clean. All those things were response to us being anxious about the risk of getting an infection into the house. So they are useful tools for us.
Certainly in my household, and I'm quite sure this is the case with so many, I do know that from talking to people, that the use of sanitizer, perhaps not as extreme as it was during the COVID period, but certainly post-COVID, as life has returned to normal somewhat, that, that still remains. People are, when they feel uncomfortable, able to use a mask without feeling as if, they will be frowned upon, or there's a social anxiety actually just by wearing a mask, but that seems to have gone, and that's a good thing. Sometimes walking into a hospital, you feel comfortable wearing a mask. I visited 2 elderly gentlemen yesterday in the hospital to see how they're doing, and I was happy to put my mask on because I felt safe and secure as much as I can, and I was able to use sanitizer. And this has also rubbed off as far as households are concerned, that we're just a bit more cautious, and having good hygiene, of course, is really, really good, isn't it? To think a bit more about, cleanliness. And cleanliness, of course, is very good for the soul anyway, but I know that's a different subject, but, it's all good.
Yes. Once again, you are absolutely right. And in fact, if you're wearing a mask, besides protecting yourself, you could be protecting others. So in my case, I had a little bit of a sore throat the last few days, and I needed to travel, and I was on the train. So I wore a mask so that at least I would be reducing the risk to other people from whatever virus I may be carrying.
There is good there. Sadly, it's good as a result of something very bad happening. I wanted actually to move over to social anxieties. Now, there are a number of social anxieties, and in your experience, would you be able to share with us the types of anxieties that you encounter as far as social anxieties are concerned?
There are different types of social anxieties. It's a broad term. In psychiatry, there is also a very specific social anxiety disorder, which is a very specific thing. It's about people experiencing nervousness about how they may carry on themselves, how they behave in a public setting where they are being observed by others. So, for example, eating in a restaurant is a public setting, or being addressed to speak across the room when there are a lot of other people who are not immediately known to this individual. So those kind of settings are when a person feels nervous, that's what we term as social anxiety. But generally speaking, social anxieties can include other things like agoraphobia, which is an anxiety about leaving your safe environment. So people who find it hard to leave their home, or they can leave the home but don't like to be very far away from home. Or they may be, they feel more anxious when they are in a train travel or bus travel, because they know that if they feel anxious, they're not likely to be able to get off anytime. They've got to wait for the next station, for the doors to open. So those kind of things, that's agoraphobic anxiety.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And then there can be other types of social anxiety. Some people are very conscious about their appearance, how their face features are built. So their anxiety is very specifically, for example, could be about how their nose looks. So they would have a self-consciousness to a degree that they will feel anxious when they are in the public setting about how their nose appears. There are people who are very conscious about their weight, etc. So different types of social anxieties. And you, I think, hinted on this anxiety post-COVID, that now the people are beginning to gather together, come across other individuals. Handshakes have come back into routine. Now people are anxious. Am I going to get infected again, even if not with COVID, with something else? So that is another legitimate anxiety. And then there are other types of anxiety disorders too. Panic disorder, commonly known, but very acute, short-lived, about half an hour, 20 minutes to half an hour, 40 minutes long symptoms of anxiety. That's a panic disorder. There is what we call as a free-floating or generalized anxiety, which is like being more nervous than is comfortable throughout the day, until you come into your own environment and disconnect with the rest of the world. And sometimes people with generalized anxiety are anxious even when they are not connected to the rest of the world. They are anxious within themselves, or about their life and the days ahead. So there are different types of anxieties, and you can broadly categorize them as social anxieties because a lot of them are linked to how we relate to our social settings.
It's interesting that you mentioned this example of there is a type of anxiety where people are anxious about how they look or how others perceive them. Social media, there's some brilliant things on social media. There are some genuinely good things, and one can broaden the mind, one can learn a great many things. But sadly nowadays, certainly there is a trend to use there's certain filters now that are available that are de-aging people, and they're able to use this, for example, to look younger. That's not good, because that as a result is going to create a new wave of anxiety, because you now have seen a false image of yourself, but you actually like it and you think, oh, this is nice, this is how I should be looking, which then makes you question, does it not, why do I look like this then? I should be looking like that. And I'm talking about the young, impressionable mind here, the early years of, from teenage years into young adulthood, when you are very, you may be very opinionated, of course, but you're very impressionable at that time. So, that's one thing I don't think is doing us any good whatsoever.
Yes, and I would say that it's not that this could lead to another wave of anxiety. In fact, it has already led us into that unfortunate state. Increasingly, in mental health settings, we are receiving young adults or even teenage, so adolescent onwards age group, with similar sort of conditions that has impaired their functionality to the degree that they are not able to focus on their schooling and education, their family relationships, their peer groups in a constructive way, and therefore they're now becoming more and more reliant on either substance misuse as a secondary coping strategy or some more self-damaging coping strategies like deliberate self-harm. And their anxieties are primarily based on the artificiality of what social media has been projecting in front of their minds on their mini screens that we carry all the time with ourselves throughout their growing up years. And I'm well conscious of increasing number of scientific research that's coming up as to how this kind of media aspects are damaging to the growing up mind, and they distract them from being able to focus on what they need to in order to become constructive adults and useful members of society. So it's a point of huge concern that you've raised. And I think that it's the responsibility of not just the educationalists or parents, but also of the governments to legislate appropriately. And you and I know that some governments have talked about it, but they're finding it hard to legislate appropriate laws relating to what can and cannot be brought onto social media, because these media companies, they escape for one reason or another.
One thing that's always bugged me is 20 seconds, 30 seconds of information is given. And I'm talking about the positive messages that are being shared on psychiatry, on psychology, on doctors sharing something, talking about something good, on history. There's such a vast area anyway. Anything can be spoken about. But it's like 30 seconds and that's it. And again, I ask you, that's not a good thing, because here on one side, a young teenager, let's say, or a student is going into seminars at university, for example, and they last 1 hour, let's say. And on the other side, the information is being given to them in 20-second bites. This cannot be good for the mind, can it? That on one side, you're being trained to have only bite-sized information all the time, as in literally, give me the facts. I don't want to have a conversation. Just give me the facts, and that's the conversation. And then having to sit through a 1 hour lecture is, and I've had people who've come to me and shared this. It's a huge ordeal. It's like, oh my God, 1 hour.
And then they're not able to concentrate during that 1 hour.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a switch, isn't it? After 20, 30 seconds, they actually switch off. They might switch on and off again, but
yes. So I think you nailed it there when you said all the time. So if there was only an occasional bit of information that came to us in a very brief sort of way for 30 seconds or 1 minute information, that would be fine, as long as we were also being exposed to a mental interaction with others for educational purposes, and with constructive dialogue, and with different opinions being expressed, and then the process of allowing the mind to process this information and come to a conclusion yourself. That's learning, that's growth, and that's strengthening of your mind. However, the problem with these media settings is that it's not just one of such information. It's one and the next and the next and the next, and this carries on 24 hours if you want, or for as long as the individual is exposed to that particular media setting. And that's where the ability of the younger people, it's been measured now in studies, that the ability of those people who are exposed to such way of information seeking is reduced. Their ability to deduct information and retain it is reduced. Their ability to concentrate on subject matter and the depth of it is reduced. Already we have that generation growing up with us. And that's a big loss, I think, for the future of the world, because these young people are going to be governing the world, being the scientists and whatever, professionals of all fields of the world. And it's important for us to have constructive people growing so that the world remains a safer place and we don't lose the sanctity of society in general.
We need to do so much, needs to be done, and so much needs to be given back to the world. But at the moment, it seems that everyone is, not everybody, let me rephrase, but a large majority of people are, it's almost like we are just focused on ourselves and nothing else matters. And am I right? It seems to be going towards just one's own self, one's own ego.
Firstly, I would say that the trend that you are describing is not restricted to a particular part of the world. Because the internet and the satellite television and the media cover the whole globe, so all societies are affected by this exposure. Secondly, to bring in a psychological aspect into this conversation, there is something called the self-determination theory of human psychology. Now, what it says is that our mind functions by having some targets or goals. Now, if we have a constructive goal, a goal that's more nature compatible, then we are likely to function in that direction. And of course, the whole society benefits from it. On the other hand, if we give up that, then the mind begins to be filled up by some more self-centered or individual-focused goals. So, for example, to begin to think of that I want to live the life to its full. This is an expression that we hear, don't we? Now,
Yes.
What does it mean really? What it means is that I want to keep experiencing anything that gives me the pleasure for that time. It's a short-term gratification-seeking goal. Hedonism is the other extreme end of this spectrum. And that, in a lot of ways, is not healthy or even beneficial for society. There is other things like, this is my life. Now, what does it in fact mean? That I want to do what benefits me, irrespective of its consequences to the others. So selfishness. I want to focus on success in my life, meaning career success, progress, more money, bigger cars, more travel. What does that mean in effect? Materialism. Now, interestingly, even though short-term gains may be achieved by focusing on these, by having these mental goals and foci, but it at the same time does not lead to a sense of contentment, because all of these short-term pleasures have also a short-term reward half-life, if you know what I mean. So a duration of how much they will give us that sense of satisfaction that we were seeking. That's also short. And that means after that, we want to have a little bit more of the same to have the same effect. Otherwise, we will feel like we've lost or we are suffering, in a state of suffering. And because we can never catch up, it becomes, in fact, a source of internal agitation rather than a sense of contentment and peace within ourselves. And it leads to more of an anxiety, more of sometimes depression if that anxiety continues for long. And we know this from stories of some of the so-called very successful people, whether they were sports people or whether they were what do you call these, the showbiz type people, they are celebrities. I mean, I sometimes wonder, why are they called celebrities or famous politicians? So, in fact, their life stories demonstrate the anguish, the agitation that they live in their day-to-day, own their own mind. In contrast to what you were alluding to have a code of life that's more nature compatible, which is refining your sensibilities so that your pleasure is not associated with just those short-term gains. In fact, it is associated with having fulfilled your responsibility towards others, whether that is your own family, your children, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, or your neighbors extended, or your local community, or the world at large. Like, in my view, you're trying to bring in your science of homeopathy through these health podcasts and help raise people's awareness about how they can help themselves, what kind of help is available to them. Now, if your gratification is associated with this work, then you're going to find peace in yourself by continuing to do this work. And love begets love, or goodness begets goodness, is a commonly understood term. If you do this kind of living, you're likely to get more positive response from the people you relate to. And that adds to your peace. So it depends on what code we are following, where our mind is focused, that determines how likely we are to either have a sense of peace and contentment, or we become agitated, anxious, or depressed. So to a degree, it's fair to say that it is dependent on how we live our lives.
We really need to go back to grounding ourselves, for want of a better word. But yeah.
That's right. And this grounding is, in psychiatric terms, we use a kind of therapy which is called mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is about grounding ourselves. It's about bringing us to our immediate environment rather than being constantly distracted by something that's elsewhere, and therefore be detached from our immediate environment. Now, again, occasionally, we do talk to our friends across the world, and it's important to keep in touch with friends and family or the news from around the world. But having said that, if that's the only thing our mind is exposed to and remains detached from our immediate environment, like will be for a person who is in front of their screen, even if they're at home or they're in a train or they're at work, then they're never present in their own environment. So mindfulness helps you to ground yourself, come back to your immediate environment, and that becomes a more comforting experience for you, psychologically speaking. And therefore you feel more relaxed, and in that relaxed state of mind, your own potentials, your abilities, your constructive abilities come into play in a better way than if you were just distracted by external stimuli for those 30-second thing that we were talking about. And having said that, people who do follow a faith and they do some kind of prayer or worship, that is also a very effective mindfulness exercise, because they focus on one reality that's relevant to them or of their choice, and then they also relate to their life in relation to this grounded state of mind. So I think that it is very important to have that kind of grounding and focusing on the needs of our immediate environment, and we relating to our immediate environment.
I wanted to move on to coping mechanisms. Now, we've spoken about social anxieties, we've spoken about post-COVID, even this self-gratification that you spoke about, and the fact of social media, and perhaps the negative side of social media and bite-sized information. And are there any, Dr. Shakeel, are there any coping mechanisms that we can do before we would seek professional medical help and support? Is there anything that can be done?
Oh, yes, definitely. The prevention is better than cure. So there are ways to prevent us from letting our natural reactive anxiety turning into an anxiety disorder. So two broad categories of prevention strategies I would mention here. One are cognitive strategies, which means relating to how we think, and the other are behavioral, obviously meaning to how we behave in response to our thought processes. So in terms of cognitive strategies, remaining factual. So somebody worrying about anxiety of getting an infection, and if we're talking in relation to COVID, let's say risk of having COVID, because COVID is not gone, by the way, it's still there. So remaining factual. What are the chances? What is happening? Rather than just believing I'm going to get COVID. So that's a very helpful thing. Challenging your thoughts. So somebody who has history of asthma and gets into breathing difficulty at certain time or in response to an allergen like hay fever, which is going to begin its thing coming spring, once they have that breathing difficulty, they should remind themselves that, look, every spring I have a bit of sneezy, breathing difficulty, runny eyes, runny nose kind of thing. I take some antihistamines, I get better. And this is my usual pattern during the spring season. And it's not a serious condition. And I manage it with that antihistamine thing. That's fine. Rather than allowing the thought, is this COVID? Once again, is this COVID? When your symptoms are typical of your previous non-serious condition, then that's what it's likely to be. So that's challenging your own thoughts. Focusing on the positives of your life. Yes, a person may feel less adequate in comparison to somebody else they have idealized, but that person should try to also remind themselves of their strength. Something beautiful about them as a person. Their value in their home in relation to their family members. Maybe that person is a wonderful husband or a wonderful wife or a parent or a child, or very good in their studies, or they've been praised by their employer for doing well at work. Anything that they can think of positive, they should remind themselves, and self-praise, even if it takes a moment, that I did well in that thing. This is a very effective way. Mindfulness, I've already mentioned, but I would say that increasingly, again, there are studies coming out from Scandinavia, from Japan, from California, that have demonstrated that people who belong to an organized faith, and they've included the three major faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, then they're either less likely to develop an anxiety disorder or depression in response to major stresses, or if they did develop, they're likely to come out of it sooner and suffer less severely than others who did not. So there's something to think about that too. So these are cognitive strategies. Moving on to behavioral ones. One thing that we probably have heard of is the breathing exercise.
Yes.
So breathing exercises are a very effective way. You need to put yourself in a very low stimulus environment. So that means quiet room, no TV, radio blaring or something. Close your eyes, sit comfortably, and remember the 5 second, 5 second, 5 seconds. So 5, 5, 5. You breathe in over a period of 5 seconds. You hold your breath for 5 seconds, and then you breathe out gently over a period of 5 seconds. It sounds short, 5 seconds, but when you're talking about breathing, it's a slightly gently prolonged duration for each of these three stages. And you do it, let's say, a cycle of 5 times, this exercise. So 15 times 5, 75 seconds, you're done with it. But this 75 seconds of this exercise will make you noticeably less anxious than before. People can try it. Our listeners can try it. And if they practice it 2 times a day, the beneficial effect of it is going to begin to last longer after each exercise. So that means a lot of their day, they will feel a bit more relaxed. So that's important. Physical exercise helps. Physical exercise is not just good for your physical health. It's equally beneficial for your mental health. And it doesn't matter whether you are a member of a fancy gym. That's not what physical exercise is only about. You could do it that way. You could go swimming, but you can also do it at home. You can do it in your local park if you like outdoor fresh air. But simple thing could be that you give yourself 15, 20 minutes of exercise, aerobics, even at home. You can do it while watching your favorite TV program. You could be doing it in front of a TV. Managing good sleep hours. That's another important thing. Our sleep, again, on one hand, is good for our physical health, boosts our immune system whilst we are sleeping, but at the same time, at a neurotransmitter level, at our brain cells communication level, it is easing them into a more rested, relaxed state. So do not deprive yourself of sleep by continuously going for late nights and then early morning work, and don't make that as your routine. Connecting to trusted family and friends. Yet again, a fascinating study, simple but very interesting. What they did was they took some members of public and they did a functional MRI scan. As you know, that this means that they were studying the activity going on in their brain whilst they were going to give them a gentle, painful stimulus to their foot.
Right.
So the person would be in a scanner, a painful stimulus would be applied to their foot, and they were divided into 3 categories. One group had nobody sitting next to them. Second group had one of the official health staff sitting next to them so they could relate to, if they wanted to this staff member. And the third group of people had one of their own loved one, a trusted family or friend sitting next to them when this experiment was done. And interestingly, the most severe brain reaction picked up on the scan was where there was nobody sitting next to a person. And minimal response was seen in the brains of those people who had their loved one sitting next to them in response to that pain. So it tells us, it's fascinating, isn't it? A simple experiment, but it's about how our psyche reacts when we are in close support network.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
And another simple behavioral thing I would say in the end is a good routine. So put yourself into a routine that this is my working hours, but this is my time to relax. I like watching a documentary, so that's what I'm going to do. Or I like reading this kind of a book. That's what I'm going to do. I like going for a walk, so I will do that. And don't stretch yourself into more and more of the other activities outside your routine. Don't do it usually. Try to follow a routine and you will feel more settled and less anxious. I think the key is more in that it is effective in the way that one would have determined their routine by themselves. So they would have put in their routine things that they must do as well. So, for example, doing groceries is an important thing. Without it, we won't survive, right? So we've got to put that into routine, and our house cleaning and our job hours and our family time hours. And if my child needs me to help them with homework, then that needs to be put into. So if I am following the routine, and I've decided what is important for me, then I'm going to end up having the day completed with a sense of satisfaction that I have achieved everything that needed to be done. And that is psychologically comforting. And it does not mean that you do not have free time. Free time should also be part of your routine. That's where I meant that if I like in my free time to go for a walk or to watch a documentary, then I should include that in my routine. A walk does not need to be in my daily routine. It can be there 3 days a week. And a documentary can be there 2 days a week. It depends. I could make a week timetable or something. And of course, occasionally I will have to skip some of the activities or add in something else that has come up, which would be fine. But routine helps because you've prioritized correctly, you've achieved your targets, you feel the satisfaction of having done your responsibility and having achieved what you needed to, and that is very comforting.
It's been humbling, and it's been a great honor to have you on today's Homeopathy Health podcast. I do hope that in the near future you will come back and we can talk more about mental health conditions, specifically where there is something perhaps that needs to be looked at professionally and what's available. It will be great to talk to you again, but for now, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. It really has been wonderful.
Thank you very much once again, and a lot of best wishes for what you are doing. Thank you.
And now it's time for reflection with poems of healing. This one is called Stray. Loose words like stray dogs. You've to be careful out of the fence. It says stray away right now. It's a warning, to be precise. These are the words of a beggar of attention, seeking, always looking for quiet and peaceful inspiration. Words in free rein, they pass quickly. They can bite in this moment and hurt, and their eyes are lost for the loneliness. They require care like the wounds you lick on your left paw, the burning bruises, what's left from the accident. Heal me, but don't get too close, you tell me. Don't walk away, do not abandon me, save me. Your words like thoughts roam loose, like tramps, dogs, stray thoughts. Stray and frail is how one outlives to himself. Dangerous perhaps if you approach towards without caution. A stray is like living roaming by streets, and that's how I feel you, like those who survived to the events that have prevailed, and now is carried by himself at the mercy of his winds. It takes care, it takes time. This poem was written by Vincenza Lofino, published in Sauti, Poems of Healing by the United Nations. It's been great having Dr. Shakeel on today's podcast to talk about the very pertinent subject matter, of course, of mental health and emotional health and well-being. Now, next week I will be talking to Luke Norland from the School of Homeopathy, and that's going to be a very interesting conversation indeed about his journey to homeopathy, and also his insight as far as treating patients. And we're going to also cover one of his new books, which covers a number of new homeopathic provings, which I can't wait. I'm so excited because any new remedies or any new remedy or remedies always fascinate me, because they always seem so timely and they always seem so in tune with what is required as we evolve, as the world evolves, as we progress. And certain remedies are just absolutely beautiful and timely for the conditions that prevail at that time. So, yeah, that's going to be very, very interesting indeed. So, as always, thank you for the many questions that you do send through. I think I'll probably have to hold or arrange a podcast just with a Q&A, actually, because there's so many questions. I think that'll actually be quite nice. And hey, what do you think of me getting other homeopaths on the show and discussing your questions and then answering them? So, I would answer one, another homeopath would answer another, and so on and so forth. So I do hope everything goes well for the upcoming week, and I very, very much look forward to speaking to you again next week. Take care. I do hope you've enjoyed the Homeopathy Health Show here on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. Tune in next time for more things homeopathy, interviews and segments on the healing possibilities that homeopathy can bring you. And don't forget to visit UK Health Radio online at www.ukhealthradio.com to see the many other amazing shows available to listen live and on demand. Or why not download the app from the iOS and Android stores. Until next time, stay safe and take care.